Daf Mem Ches Amud Aleph. We'll begin Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. We're holding in the middle of the sugya. We brought down the brisa that a mevashel gid anosh b'cholev b'yontov, and he eats it. He gets 5 malchus, 5 sets of malchus. And one of the sets of the malchus that he gets is, we said, is mishum havara. And the Gemara had a kasha. How can you say one of them is havara for burning the fire, for burning the wood? If we say hoyol, if we adopt the principle of hoyol, you shouldn't be chayiv, because hoyol v'chazil etzarcha. Because you say that, well, perhaps, even though it's not his intent, but perhaps he will use that fire for his own cooking. So he say hoyol shouldn't be chayiv. So the Gemara therefore suggested that we remove from the list havora and insert rather muksa. And he holds that muksa is a deraisa. The Gemara, how can you say that it's muksa deraisa? So Abai said to Rabba, Omerle, Abai said to Rabba, Atu da Amrad, you're the one who said, Boy mi nemer of Chista, Omerle, boy mi nemer of Huna. He asked the following shaila, Hey, we said, Me'afar, Ushchachta Tami B'yantemahu, if a person brought a sheep from a pasture, from a distant pasture, so it's muksa, and he shechted it for a korban tamid on Yontev. What's the halacha? Can you be makriv on the mizbeach? But omrat alon, and you said, v'omrat la aloy. After you said from the following pasuk, you brought the raya from the following pasuk. There's a pasuk in Yecheskel. The pasuk says, "V'seh achas min hatzayin min hamasayim mimashka yisrael lemincha loylo le'shlomim v'le'shlomim l'chapra aleim duma Hashem l'kim." So the pasuk says in Yecheskel that you bring a seh achas min hatzayin. What are you makriv on the mizbeach? You makriv on the mizbeach a seh achas min hatzayin min hamasayim from 200. Well, the Gemara will explain. We'll darshan from this achas. Min hatzayin, min hamasayim, mimashka Yisrael, from the banquet of Yisrael. Literally means from what you drink from Yisrael, but we learn it to mean, we interpret it to mean that at a banquet you have mashke. So it means from a mashke from Yisrael that you're makriv mincha loyal or shlamim. So we darshan as follows. It says, darshan, the pasuk says, it says, v'seh, v'loy b'chor. It says, v'seh, which we darshan, aseh, with a seh can be either a zocher and a keva, can be a male or a female. So what can you be makriv or l'shlomim? That's something which can be either a zocher and a keva, but not a b'chor. A b'chor is only the firstborn of a male, of a zocher. So a b'chor cannot be brought for a different korban, for any other korban. Achas, it says achas, we darshan achas v'loy mais. What do you bring for an oil shlomim? It's something which is an individual, stands on its own, but not something which is part of a group. So it's achas v'loy meiser. Meiser behema, which is from a group of 10. You count 10, the 10th one is meiser. Meiser behema cannot be used also for another korban. Min hatzayin, so it says, the pasuk says that achas min hatzayin, from the sheep. So that is v'loy apalgus. That's not apalgus. So the sheep is something that in the first 12 months is called a keves, and after the 13th month it's called after the 13th month it's called an ayil. Within that period of time of the 13th month itself, it's called a palgus. So we darshan that it's min hatzayin from the tzayin, but not from a palgus. A palgus is not royal akrova. Min hamasayim, it says from 200. What is that referring to? That we're saying that's referring to the nesachim. It's referring to nesachim. You can bring nesachim from something which is from 200, meaning that is if you have the leftover 200 in a bore, in the pit, meaning mikan l'orla shabat l'masayim. If you have orla, and you have orla, wine of orla mixed in a bore, you have 200 parts of heter, the orla is bottle in the 200, then you can bring that for the korban nesachim. But otherwise, it's orla and it cannot be used for the korban sochim. So here you learn out the din of bittul. The bittul varala is in 200. Mimashke Yisrael, it says from the banquet of Yisrael. So you can bring things, meaning things that can be used for a mashke Yisrael, things that can be used that are mutter to Yisrael, that you can bring for a korban. Things which are also to Yisrael, you cannot bring for a korban. Mina mutter li Yisrael. It's only that which is mutter Yisrael. Mikan omru ein mevin nesachim min hatevel. From here we learn out you cannot bring the nesachim from tevel. Tevel is also to Yisrael. Now, you might think also that you can't bring from something which is muksa, that also you can't bring, and you can't bring it from the sochim, wine that is muksa, amrat. Say no. We say it's compared to tevel. Tevel is something which is inherently also. It's not also for an outside reason. It's isura gufa goram. Of course, isur gufa goram. So that too, what we say where you cannot bring it is also something which is similar, which is isur gufa goram. Yotza muksa shein isur gufa goram. But yotza isur muksa, which it's not the item itself. It's not inherently also. It's also in Shabbos and Yom Tov. Otherwise, it's mutter. So that's yotza that where it's yotza muksa shein isur gufa goram ela isur davar acher goram. It's something external. So now, what's his kasha? Now, v'i amrit isur muksa d'oraisa. If you're going to say that isur muksa d'oraisa, mali isur gufa, mali isur davar acher. What difference does it make if it's an isur d'oraisa? Elamai, doesn't this show you that muksa is not a d'oraisa? V'oid, and I'll bring you another raya. V'oid ha'at hu da'amrat chil malachas l'Shabbos v'ein chil malachas l'Yontiv. That there's a chilik in the malachas l'gabi Shabbos. L'gabi Shabbos there is a chilik in the malachas. The different malachas, if a person is over, then he's chayav for the different malachas. He's chayav b'shegeg, a separate chatas for each malacha that he does separately. But on Yontiv, if he does it b'mezid on Yontiv, if there is only one hasra and then he does several malachas, then he is not chayav for the separate malachas. Or alternatively, if he does all of the malachas, he does several malachas in one maisa, he's also only chayav one set of malchus. He's not chayav for separate malachas. So now over here, if you're telling me that in this list that we were talking about, that you tell me that apik havora, remove havora and include muksa, well, how can you say that? Even if muksa would be a deraisa. Now, he proved firstly that it's not, but even if muksa would be deraisa, how can you say that muksa is part of this list? How can you say it's part of the list? You're telling me that you have bishul on Yontiv and you have bishul of muksa, then that's one maisa. Then how could you be chayev for separate malchus on that? There's ain't chiluk malchus beyond. So how can you possibly say that muksa is part of this list over here? Meaning, as the Pnei Yeshua explains, that even if we were to say that muksa is deraisa, it doesn't mean the muksa that we commonly understand being metaltal muksa. Because if you're metaltal muksa, moving muksa, then it's not coming in the same action. It's not in the same session. It's not the same maisa over here. If tiltal muksa would be the raisa, then you moved it, and then you moved it, and you cooked it, and you're burning it and cooking with it. That's a separate maisa. The Pnei Yeshua explains that if we would hold muksa deraisa, it's not tiltal. Tiltal zikr would be the rabbana. That is, tiltal zikr would be the rabbana. What he means to say is that it's the putting it on the fire. It means that using it. It means only if he uses it, that's where it would be a deraisa. When he uses it, then making use of it, not just being metaltal. If we would hold that tiltal, that muksa is deraisa, it doesn't mean tiltal. It means making use of it would be deraisa. So making use of it comes at the same maisa as the cooking, and therefore, why would you be chayiv a separate set of malchus? Elamai, we must say that it is not, we cannot say apik havara and insert muksa. So if you can't insert muksa, comes back the kasha, well, if it's havara, why should it be malchus if you say hoyel? So Ella in Chanan. Ella, we must have another suggestion. Ella apik havora v'aylatzei. Rather, apik havora, remove from the list havora and insert atzei shera, that he's making use of the wood of an Asherah tree, which is an Avodah Zarah, which is also and it says that you can't keep anything, you can't have anything in your hand, attached to your hand, something from that which is banned, from the Avodah Zarah. The Avodah Zarah is also the Asherah trees of Avodah Zarah, using that wood for firewood, he's over that law. Well, if you're telling me that it's an Avodah Zarah, why is there only 5 sets of malchus? Why don't you should have a 6th one? And also Elamai, since the mention is only mention of 5, it can't be that we're talking about a share, because a share would involve an extra set of malchus, and therefore clearly we're not talking about that case. Fractisis. Well, why don't we mention that case? And you tell me a chiddush you can be chayiv even for 5 sets of malchus. Well, talk about, say the case is talking about a shera, and there's even a 6th case of malchus, 6th set of malchus, which would be a bigger chiddush. So it's fair. But al kol panim, it can't be that the list included in the list is a shera. Ella, the Gemara says, rather ella apik havara v'ayel atzei hektish. Rather, remove havara, and include in the list that he used the wood, the firewood of hektish. V'azhara mehacha v'asherem tisrim be'esh. You have to burn the Asherah tree. You have to destroy the Avodah Zarah, the Asherah tree. Leisasu ken l'Hashem lekechem. Don't do this for something which is hektish. So he'd be over alav. Let us say the machlekes Rav Chis and Rab, whether we say hoyel, meaning if one bakes from Yontiv to a weekday, to Yom Chol, is he chai midaraisa or not, is based on the machlekes of hoyel. Do we say hoyel that guests might come, hoyel that since there might be guests and he would use it for guests, meaning even if his intent is not for himself, but there's a possibility that it will be used for Yontiv, that orchim hoyel v'kloy orchim, therefore, according to Rabbah, there's no chiyuv, because we take that possibility into account. Rav Chisa says we don't, and he would be chayv. Let us say that that is the basis of the machlokes and the Mishnah between Rav Eliezer and Rav Yeshua. The Rav Eliezer savar amin and hoyel, Rav Yeshua savar lo amin and hoyel. That is the basis of the machlokes. We have the machlokes in the Mishnah. If he has the dough which is tamei, according to Rav Eliezer, he bakes all the loaves, and then he takes one loaf and he now designates that as challah. Now, even though that loaf that he baked is challah, is not for his use, how could he bake it on Yontiv? It's not lachem, it's not for his use. So let us say that the reason that Rabbi Eliezer says that that's mutter, because hoyel, since he had the possibility of, when he bakes the loaves, of breaking off a piece of each loaf and designating it as challah and using it as challah, since that possibility occurred, so when he baked it, even though his intent at the time of baking was not to do that, even though his intent was to designate a separate loaf for challah and not break all the other ones, but since that is a possibility, he holds that it's mutter to do it. And Rav Yeshua says, no, you can't, because he does not hold of hoyel. So let us say that's the basis of the machlekes. Amar Papa, no. Who says, Dilma Adkan loy kamer Rabbi Eliezer hasam darmin and hoyel, Ella de avidna de kama'ayel le tanur kol charav charav chazal day. Perhaps he would not say hoyel generally speaking, but he allows it in this case because when he bakes each loaf in the oven, then each one is roy for himself, meaning at the time that he bakes the loaf, we don't know which one is going to be the challah. The challah loaf is not designated, so there's a possibility that each and every one of those loaves will be used by him. So that's enough to say that it's mutter, because there's a possibility that each loaf will be used by him. Aval heicha de orchen, aval hach de orchen, the orcheno the chazel the daily chazi. But we would not apply oil in the case of Rabba and Rav Chisda. Perhaps Rabbi Elazar would say that in the case of Rabba and Rav Chisda, meaning that he baked on Yontif for the Yemai Chol, so he's definitely not intending to use it for himself. That aval hach de orchenu the chazel the daily chazi, it's only for others and not for himself. Then perhaps we would not take that into account, the possibility that visitors would come. Meaning here he's baking for himself. There's a possibility that he can use each and every one of these loaves. So therefore, we would say that it's mutter. But to bake for Yemei Chol, to bake for the next day, where he's definitely not intending to use it for himself, to take into account the possibility that guests might come. They're not here now. They might come, and they might use it for that. Perhaps in such a case, he won't say hoil. And Amar Rashisha Braid Ravidi Vidilmalohi, and also let us say, as far as Rav Yeshua is concerned, it's also not correct, because you're suggesting that Rav Yeshua doesn't hold of hoil. In the Mishnah, he says that you cannot bake all of the loaves, like Rabbi Elazar suggested. He argues because there's going to be one loaf that at the end of the day is definitely not going to be used, not for him, not for anybody. It's going to be challah, which cannot be consumed. But over here, there's a possibility, even though it's not his intent right now, but there's a possibility that this will be used, what is being baked will be used for orchim. That's possible. So therefore, perhaps, therefore, in such a case, he would say hoil. Perhaps he does not say hoil. It's in the case of the Mishnah where definitely one loaf is not going to be consumed. But over here, where there's a possibility that the food will be consumed, then perhaps he would say hoil. Now Rashi points out that how can you say that Rabbi Yeshua holds of hoil? He seems to be clearly that he doesn't hold of hoil, because he says you're not oiver bal yiral bal yamotza. Rabbi Yeshua says in the Mishnah, don't bake the challah, leave the dough, and whatever is left over, that which is designated for challah, if it turns into chametz, you're not oiver bal yiral bal yamotza, because it's not yours. Now if he held of hoil, well, why don't you say hoil boil Mitchell? Maybe he could be shoyal on his designation of challah, and he would be over. So doesn't that show you clearly that he does not hold of hoil? Rashi answers that perhaps Rav Yeshua does hold of hoil, but as far as Bal Yarab, Bal Yamatz is concerned, he still would say that you don't have to be concerned about chimutz, because currently this dough has been designated as challah, and therefore right now he doesn't own it. Even though possibly later he can be shoyal, but he won't be over Bal Yira Bal Yamatza, because currently it's not his ownership, so he won't be over. So therefore, when the Gemara is suggesting at this point that we do not tie in the machlokes of Rav Elazar and Yeshua into the machlokes of Rabba and Rav Chisda. Amru Rabbanan Kami the Rabbi Yirmiyah Rav Zera. So they said over this in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah Rav Zera, Rabbi Yirmiyah Kibbel of Rabbi Zera Lakira, and Rabbi Yirmiyah was Makabalit, and therefore he said it is the basis of the machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Yeshua. And Rabbi Yirmiyah was Rabbi Zera Lakibla. He was not makabel. He didn't accept it. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rav Zera Milsa the Kashlan. We also come Hashan. This has been so difficult for us for many years. B'mai pligi Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yeshua. What is the basis of their machlokes? And hashtamru mishmei legav Rabba. And now that it's been said in the name of a great person, meaning Rabbi Bar Chama, v'lo nekabla, and we should not accept it, and we should not accept that this is the basis of the machlokes. How can we accept this? Because we learned in the Brisa, Amalei Rabbi Yeshua says, according to you, that you say, bake all the loaves, you're going to be over the malacha, because one of the loaves is challah. And you're going to be over, therefore, on the malacha, v'shosikle, and Rabbi Elazar did not answer. Meaning he didn't have an answer that could be acceptable to Rabbi Shua. Now, if it's so, like Rabbi Barchama says, that the basis of Rabbi Elazar's heter is based on hoyel, why doesn't he say, well, it's mutter, the reason is of hoyel? And since it's hoyel, therefore, it's possible that we could take into account that each loaf will have a part of it which is challah, and not have one loaf which is totally challah, and therefore at the time of baking it should be mutter. So Amar Le, he said to Rosera, so he said, Ul-Tameich, you're trying to be right from here. Ul-Tameich, ha-de-tanina baraisa. We learned in the Baraisa, Amar Le Rabbi Lezer said, L'dvarach taina to Rishua. He said, according to you, Harehu Oiver, Mishum Bal Yero, Bal Yemotze. He says, how can you say just leave it and don't bake it? Aren't you going to be over? Bal Yero, Bal Yemotze. Vishasik Lein Rishua did not answer him. Now, if it's true, according to what you're saying, Achaname Deloy Nahaderle, do we say that, well, it means that he didn't have an answer? That he didn't answer because he didn't have an answer that he could tie it with conviction? What do you mean? We have the teretz. He had a teretz, and which we learned in the Mishnah, this non. He says there's no Isser Bal Yero Bayamatza over here because this chametz does not belong to him. There's no owner over here. So he has an answer. Elamai, the fact that there's no answer given in the Baraisa doesn't mean that he doesn't have an answer. The Baraisa does not record the answer, but the Mishnah does. So Hachanami here in this case as well, the kasha that Rabbi Shua asked Rabbi Elazar, even though there's no answer that's mentioned in the Baraisa, but still, maybe the answer is given in a mechilta somewhere else in another brisa. So therefore, you cannot bring a raya from that. Tanya, we learned the brisa. Rabbi Elazar. He said we paskin like a Elazar, and you bake all the loaves. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar halacha given b'seira. He says the halacha is like ben b'seira. That what you do is that you separate the challah. You separate the challah, and then you put it in cold water so that it doesn't become chametz. And that's the better way to do it. Rather than bake it, first separate the challah, put it in cold water so it doesn't become chametz, and then you don't have the problem about baking the other loaves. The kamashir yisa, how much can you need? How much of it can you need on Pesach? And the way the Rosh explains it is as follows. Now, even though we allow you to knead on Pesach, and we allow you to knead the dough, but what is the maximum amount that you can say that you can ensure that it won't become chametz? So meaning that when you work the dough, you knead it, it's worked, that inhibits the chimutz. If it's lying dormant, then there is a chashash that will come to day chimutz. What's the maximum amount that you can knead? What's the size of the batch that we can ensure that you're constantly kneading it, you can protect it from becoming chametz? Rabbi Shmuel ben Yechon ben Roika, if the dough is made out of wheat, then it's 2 kabin. Ubesarim shloisha is kabin. If it's barley, it's 3 kabin. Rabbi Nosson Rabbi Elazar Chilo Advarim. He says just the opposite. He says the meaning of machlokes, which one is mechametz faster. If it's mechametz faster, you can only do a smaller share. If it's slower in becoming chametz, you can do a larger share. Rabbi Shmuel ben Oishel Rabbi Yechon ben Roika Omer bechitin shloishes kamesarm arba kamin. He says chitin wheat is 3 kamesarm is 4. So it seems to be a series. The answers like kasha bechase chalsa. The second brisa is dealing with poor quality grain, which becomes chametz slower. Ha b'mal yosa. The first brisa, which gives a smaller share, is with better, higher quality grain, and that is mechametz faster, so you can only use a smaller quantity. Rav Papa said, Shmami, now we can learn from this that garin chiti chasichosa mechiti malyosa tvei megarin nesare chasichosa mesar malyosa. We can see from here that the ratio between poor wheat and good wheat, it deteriorates more the inferior quality is more than the relationship between good and superior and inferior barley. How is that? Tilson. And as far as the wheat is concerned, the difference between them is a third. The first brisa said that it's talking about superior wheat. It says only 2 kavan. The second brisa, which is inferior, is 3. So you see the difference between the two as far as the quality, as far as chimutz, is a third. As far as barley, it's a quarter. The difference is 3 and 4, which is a quarter. So you see that the deterioration or the inferior wheat, the difference between it and superior wheat, the ratio, the discrepancy is more than, by the case of barley, the difference between a third and a quarter.